There you go.
I think it was very good. I enjoyed it. I'm curious to know if you know anything about Kenyan runners. I've been reading something about it. They just seem to be too dominant in marathon.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, that was definitely the issue making an hour-long film was kind of what stories do we focus on. And your question about Kenyan runners is very topical. Recently, the kind of sport in Kenya have come under question. A lot of Kenyan marathon runners have failed drug tests. And that also kind of coincides with this big investigation into corruption in Russia. Ends up, Russia has been engaged in kind of Soviet-style state-sponsored doping to the point where they're actually currently banned from participating in track and field. So it'll be interesting to see if that ban carries over to the next Olympics. To answer your question directly, yes, I'm aware of what's going on in Kenya, and I think this film ultimately speaks to the fact that the corruption, I think, that goes on as far as doping is concerned, isn't solely the fault of the athletes. I think usually it's imposed upon the athletes, not only by the coaches, but by the countries that benefit from these athletes' performances. And I think when we kind of scrutinize doping in sport, I think, sure, the athletes deserve some blame, but I think we have to look at the people who are enabling this behavior. So I think, even talking about Kenya specifically, questioning, like in Jamaica, what are the protocols to test their athletes? How rigorously is that going on? What kind of lab standards? I don't think there is a lab in Kenya, but what's the lab like in that part of Africa that these samples would be going to, and how effective are they at actually detecting substances? So I think that was the kind of heart of what we were trying to do with this film. I think everybody right now is familiar with the athletes who dope, but there's a kind of a lack of understanding of how effective or ineffective the people tasked with trying to police that have been in the last decade or so. And yeah, there's clearly a failing on the sports governance side, and hopefully more people kind of pay attention to that. Question down in front.
Thank you. My name is Stephen. You mentioned Russia. Does that kind of give WADA more credibility that they were able to call out an entire nation like that? Does that credibility go away if this game goes away before the Olympics?
Well, so again, for those of you who aren't familiar with what's been going on with Russia, so a German filmmaker who's done quite a few films about doping in sport, and Russian athletes came to him a couple years ago and basically said, hey, we're engaging in state-sponsored doping. Coaches are kind of pushing these drugs on us. The labs are in on it. Ultimately, it was revealed that the Russian intelligence agency was in on it. And so there was a film done. Originally, when it came out on British or German television, in December 2015, it was kind of dismissed by WADA, which again, I think demonstrates the initial kind of arrogance that somehow they're the authority on the subject. And I think there is this reticence to kind of hear what's going on and what the problem areas are in drug and sport issues that they're not involved in. So it kind of took some pressure when people said, yeah, the claims in this documentary are legitimate, that WADA actually put together an independent commission to investigate this. And what they found was that the claims are real. Like I said, the Russian track and field team is banned from international competition. It'll be curious to see how strong that kind of cloud of WADA will extend to the Olympics, because like Selena Roberts said in the interview that we did before all this kind of came out, it's not really in the IOC's best interest of the member countries to keep other countries out of the Olympics. So, and ultimately, the only power that WADA has is to kind of make these recommendations. So, the question was, does this kind of validate WADA's purpose? I think it shows how effective WADA's been. The fact that you can have, I think WADA even said that the 2012 London Olympics in track and field were fraudulent, were kind of totally undermined by this Russian doping. So it just goes on to show that all this kind of went on under their noses, and to kind of think that getting a bunch of countries together who still benefit from performance and performance enhancement from athletes is going to kind of stop this problem, I think is kind of naive on their part. So it's good to kind of see WADA making recommendations and kind of trying to clean up sport, but clearly they were late to this whole issue and took an outside party to kind of make them aware to what was going on in Russia.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
Did WADA ever say why it did not want to reveal the specifics of its testing procedures? Because my mind tells me that they probably want to keep that secret so that people don't cheat by skirting the formula that they're using.
No, again, it's. I think the problem is a lot of this we want to kind of boil down to just simple black and white, positive, negative. When you're dealing, especially with tests like HGH, for a substance that can clear your body very rapidly, you're talking about thresholds. And I think the idea of, well, where did you come up with what is a kind of performance-enhancing level of the threshold? Just the kind of the baseline, I think, is what the question was. The fact that they weren't willing to talk about their sample size, what athletes they were looking at, was an issue. And ultimately, it came back to Brightwater because there was a case involving an Estonian skier named Andreas Virgalu, who, when he did test positive for HGH, he challenged it in the Court of Arbitration for Sport. And even though the Court of Arbitration for Sport said, yeah, this guy is most likely probably doping, the test isn't scientifically valid enough that we can accept it in some sort of court. So he was, that case was tossed out. He didn't have to serve the suspension. Ultimately, the players in the NFL kind of, to the dismay of WADA, I think issued a press release and that came out saying, see, we told you so. But I think that was the issue, is figuring out kind of, well, where did you arrive at, the thresholds or the sample size for this test.
Okay, that's clear. I have a kind of fantastical question. What would happen if sports just behaved like Colorado and made it legal to take drugs?
Well, I think that's also that's something that's brought up a lot, and I think that's also another. I don't mean to insult you, but just the general thought I think is kind of lazy because again, when you really delve into it, it's not as easy as that because everybody responds to drugs differently. So the notion that somehow that would level the playing field, just let everybody take it.
Oh no, I wasn't thinking of leveling the playing field.
But just go.
I mean, it's an entertainment field.
Yeah, well, the problem there is, and what nobody wants, I think the legitimate argument that we want to look out for these people's health and safety is.
Who wants to look out for that?
Well, I think the athletes themselves do.
Yeah, so the athletes can choose whether or not they want to participate.
But I think again, it's there's a lot more factors that go into it. Obviously, I don't think the way the kind of cultural climate has been that people want to see sport like that. I mean, like you said, it's a fantastical question. Could we sometime arrive at an excess like that? Perhaps, but from what I've heard, it seems like. From my just kind of interviewing fans, it seems like people don't want athletes to be using performance-enhancing drugs, but at the same time, they kind of just don't want to know about it either. I mean,
that's where I'm coming from. The duplicity is so rampant, not only in the fans, but in the executives. It's like a false arena.
And I think, we brought up Toradol in this, which is, some people would say, well, Toradol is a bit different than steroids or HGH or something like that. But I think it goes to the question of, well, how do you determine what's good and what's bad in terms of okay to use and what's not? And I think that, as opposed to just kind of allowing everything, because there are legitimate medical reasons why some drugs should not be abused. I think a lot of lists could be better kind of vetted for certain substances that are on there. But I mean, in the process of making this film, I haven't found a good argument for why, we should just kind of allow athletes to take whatever they want. Actually, I think David Epstein had a good line, which didn't make the film, but he was talking about sports are basically just. And I'm going to butcher this, not as smart as Dave Epstein, but basically sports are just kind of competing within confines of arbitrary rules. And so you can't have sports without rules. And so the notion that, yeah, some things are okay to use and some things aren't is by definition kind of a part of what makes sports. So, having this kind of libertarian idea of just let them use whatever, I personally, I wouldn't be in favor of that. But.
So can I have this? It seems like what you're saying is that an athlete with Adam's character, the man who did not take drugs because that was his decision as an adult, can't participate on their own, and there can't be more Adams, I guess, is what I'm saying. Let the Adams come forward and play their way, and the people who need to be treated like children, watching where they cheat, where they don't cheat, run their own risks of hurting their body. And
yeah, well, see, one of the legitimate gripes that I would have against WADA, for example, is a lot of this is just conjecture. And what I'm very frustrated by, was surprised about when I first kind of looked into the subject, was that there is no kind of barometer, any sort of statistic to measure the usage of performance-enhancing drugs in sport. And certainly the government tracks, heroin abuse or marijuana abuse. I mean, no matter how good or bad it is, there's still kind of statistical models to try and measure prevalence of drug use. And the fact that hasn't been applied by the World Agency somehow in sport is kind of disconcerting, because I would like to think that most athletes are like that. That it's kind of the fringe athletes who are going to be tempted to kind of forego any sort of morals and take performance-enhancing drugs. But there is no kind of statistics to back that up. And what I've heard is and what I've read, there's been kind of recent studies that have been published that when WADA has tried to conduct studies like that, the numbers of prevalence, at least in sports like track and field, have been over 50%. So, I think before you can start having conversations of, should we legalize this or I think you have to understand just kind of how many athletes are actually using this stuff. And I think until you understand that issue, it's very difficult to kind of go about trying to solve the problem. Yes, sir?
I just have to respond to something. It's not just the fringe athletes that are led to doing drugs. It's those athletes which are at the top of their very bonds, so it's not a fringe athlete.
So when I say fringe, I mean, I'm sorry, minority. The minority, not
okay,
not fringe.
From a talent point of view, we're not talking about people who are deficit in talent.
Well, I'd say Lance Armstrong's an exception.
Exactly.
And I'd say that the biggest tragedy of performance-enhancing drugs is that you have a lot of stellar athletes whose careers and reputations have been tarnished, despite being great athletes, because they kind of
because they want to continue.
Right, and I think that's a legitimate conversation. So recently, this whole notion of Peyton Manning taking HGH, you can get into the whole question of whether he did or he didn't, but the idea that potentially there is a drug that will help an athlete recover from injury faster so they can get on the field sooner, I don't know, if I'm an athlete, I don't know why I would take that, especially if I'm getting a paycheck. And if I'm a fan, I don't know why I would want a drug that, my favorite athlete can take so I can watch him, play when I go to the ballpark or go to the football stadium. So again, I think that's a conversation that needs to be had. With the issue of HGH, that's a conversation bigger than sport, because a lot of these drugs are highly controlled by the government. HGH, even if a doctor wanted to give a guy like Peyton Manning HGH for injury recovery, he legally couldn't write a prescription for that. From my understanding, it's narrowly limited to children with growth deficiencies. So, there's really no other medical reason. So there's talk about therapeutic use exemption in sport to use some of these drugs. There is no legal therapeutic use exemption for something like HGH. So, that would have to be at a kind of congressional level to understand why are we outlawing these drugs, this specific drug. And again, I think that's another problem with this whole system, is that we really don't know what a lot of these drugs do, because there's not really research to demonstrate that they're even performance enhancing. To get on the WADA banned list, the drug or substance rather needs to meet 2 of 3 thresholds. First is it has to be proven to be performance enhancing, which is very difficult to do ethically from a scientific standpoint. Second, it needs to be harmful to an athlete's health. You could make an argument that anything can be harmful to somebody's health. And third, it has to violate the spirit of sport, which is a fairly subjective, I mean, they outline what the spirit of sport is, but it's a pretty subjective criteria. And so, pretty much you can put, if it has to be 2 of those 3, you can put anything on the ban list. And to me, that just doesn't seem like a very serious way of actually kind of engaging and figuring out, what's good and what's bad. Because, again, talking with athletes, I think a lot of them say if sports science is kind of advancing as far as substances and pharmacology, why can't we have better sneakers than we did 10 years ago? We have better workout regimens. Why is this the one realm of sport that isn't allowed to kind of advance? So I think that's kind of a legitimate question. My goal in making this film was that it would kind of stimulate conversations like that and engage folks like you and hopefully they'll talk about them with your friends. But I think there needs to be some sort of public discourse for anything like that to take